Ellen. Thank you so much. Such a pleasure having you here. So, how are you? What's happening? Which part of the world are you dialing in from today?
It's so good to see you, Gaurav. Welcome. Yeah, good. For me, it's good morning. So I'm calling in today from the United States. I live in Massachusetts, more specifically, a little town called Northampton, about 2 hours drive west of Boston, off of the Atlantic Ocean. But again, you think you said it so well about, we may be separated geopolitically, different boundaries, but there is a unification coming together around, I'll call it a consciousness, a sense of where we are evolving to. So I'm just really excited today to be here with you and to speak. So thanks.
Ellen, you know what? I remember our first conversation, which is like a couple of years back, and then we had
Yeah.
series of conversation. I think something that stayed with me, and I'll tell you why. Because one of the philosophies for the longest period of time, I've been dabbling with the space of coaching and leadership development for 16 years now. For the longest period of time, I've heard myself saying, "Who you are is how you coach." And interestingly, one of our initial conversations, you mentioned how you lead is who you are.
Yeah.
And I could see that how they come together. Would love to hear from you. In a world where we live in, where people are evaluated based on their performance and the results that they achieve, how do you define the concept of who you are, and how does that impact your performance?
It's just such a good question. So as you say that, what comes to mind is I'll use an analogy, because you asked the question and you said, in a world in which we are evaluated by our performance. And I think maybe the clearest analogy for all of us is professional sport, right? Because in professional sports, they say you're only as good as your last game. And there's metrics. You either win or you lose. You have more score. So it's very easy to measure the results, right? So and again, if you're not a big sports fan, I'm not trying to be exclusive here. I just think it's a very simple analogy we can all relate to. So we think about that in sports. So what we see is game time. What we do not see are at a professional or Olympic level, we do not see the hours and hours and hours of training, of coaching. And the fact is, some people embrace the practice, the internal work of development to get to the playing stage or the playing field in coaching and in sports, I should say, more than others, right? So obviously, like, I'm a recreational athlete. So I may go out and run a couple times a week, ride my bike, lift weights once every so often. But if I was a professional, I can tell you I have a much more rigorous practice regime. So I share all that because we're all measured in terms of the score. First of all, I think it's important for each of us to decide, what game are we playing? Who's keeping score? Do we care who's keeping score? Because a lot of people, and I meet lots of people, I work in the corporate world, and there's a lot of people who go through, and I think you and I had this conversation, they kind of go onto the track and they go through university, they start in their 20s and they're like, oh, I have to be successful. And what successful really means is I need to get a powerful job that earns a lot of money, that gives me status, and then I will be happy, right? That's the kind of the story they've told themselves. And I cannot tell you how many people I've met who kind of go along that track, and many of them accelerate. And they get to, let's say, their mid-30s, early 40s. They've gotten a lot of this stuff. They've achieved these outward performance goals. And I think you and I said they've discovered there's a hole in the soul, right? It's that sense of, oh, I've got here, but it hasn't made me any happier. And so as I think, and I ask all of us to consider, first of all, what is your scoreboard? And then if your scoreboard is about living a life of, and it may not be money, it may not be, outward trappings of success, fancy cars and jewelry, whatever, right? It doesn't have to be that. In fact, I hope that you decide what it is for you. And certainly those are not the things that drive my life. And so the question I would ask is, once you figure out what is the result that you want. So if you want to be a kind person, a person of service, a person who feels love and security, and also is of service to others. And in doing so, because they say the fastest way, and the research shows this too, the fastest way to be happy is to make other people happy. And that's just, there's tons of research on that. So if that is the scoreboard that you measure, then you have to ask yourself, so what are the exercises that I'm doing every day? Because that is not going to happen on its own. Just it doesn't happen, Olympic level athletes don't run, at world record paces out of nowhere. It's not just natural talent. So then the question becomes, what are you doing every day? What is your practice? And so for me, so much of the practice of the score that I'm keeping has to do with, Do I take time to self-reflect? Am I humble enough to take feedback from others? Do I have a coach? The answer is yes, I have a coach. I have a therapist. I continue to work with people to develop myself because I didn't come into this world full born, and I'm still a work in process. And I think it's so important for all of us to consider the scoreboard and then what is the practice that you want to develop that is going to help you to achieve the score that you are aiming for.
Thank you, Alain, for bringing that, because what I'm listening right now is, what are those measures? What are those parameters based on which I tend to evaluate myself? What are those filters that I have created for myself through which I look at so-called success?
Mm-hmm.
So you also spoke about, you brought in the analogy of being kind. You brought in the importance of being reflective in the conversation. Now, in the context of leadership, on one hand, we have the leaders like Nelson Mandela's of the world. We have leaders like Donald Trump's in the world. We have leaders like Putin. We have leaders like Dalai Lama's in the world. All of them are leading in their respective ways, and all of them are producing some phenomenal results in their own ways. What do you think? What's that one difference that makes all the difference? And here I'm bringing in Donald Trump, I'm bringing in Nelson Mandela, I'm bringing in Martin Luther King, I'm also bringing in Osama bin Laden, because if you look at the world through the eyes of Osama bin Laden, I'm sure he would have checked all the boxes that says, I am successful. What is the difference that makes all the difference?
I think the difference, what is the difference that makes a difference? I think it is their values, right? And so the fact is, values become this guiding North Star by which they kind of guide us towards, and the thing is, different people can value different things to achieve a different result. Let me give you an example by that. So I'll use Nelson Mandela and Donald Trump. pretty different leaders, right? So when Nelson Mandela makes the choice, and some people have heard the story about, after he spent all the time in prison on Robben Island, and he comes back, and the rugby team, the national rugby team, comes, and he decides, it's a big contention because it's a question, and they've done books about this, they've done movies about this. There's a big contention of, should he just close the rugby team down, which is a big pride in the white South Africans. He realizes, no, that's going to create conflict. Now, what he's trying to get to is unification. And so he's willing to humble himself for the long-term picture. And what he realizes, by doing so, the result that he wants to get is for people to come together. And the result that is going to create is, for him on a personal level, it's going to create a sense of ego gratification. Because we can be of service, but fact is, I get something out of being of service. I'm not completely selfless. My values say that being of service is great. And that actually gives me this warm feeling. The chemicals in my brain start releasing all the dopamine, and the oxytocin starts to release. So that I get all that. So if I'm Nelson Mandela, I'm getting all that through service, through the value of unification. Now, if I'm Donald Trump, I want those warm, fuzzy feelings too. But because of the way that I've brought up, the way that my brain is wired, and because of the reinforcement that I've got, for me, dominating people, cutting people off, having my way, they had things like, throwing a tantrum. These are all things I need to be in control in mind. So he's got very different values, which create very different beliefs, which create very different stories about what's going on, which create very different behaviors, both trying to create a result that creates something. But, it's like they've been constructed maybe out of the same genetic, basic, primal materials, but the combination is mixed up in a completely different way. So I'd say the difference boils down to, what do you value? And I think it's important for all of us to take some time to reflect on, what are my values, and are the values that I'm currently living ones that I truly embrace, or are these ones that maybe I've inherited, whether that's from family, society, friends? And I think part of it is, do we have the courage to put those values up in the mirror and go, that one fits. I don't need that one anymore. That's not really about me. And again, I think this journey continues. It goes on and on. So am I willing to let go of certain values over other ones because they're not serving me? So to me, it comes down to values.
Yeah. So Alain, interestingly, I've been debating on this for quite some time with different people. Every time when I speak to people from different religion, from different sect, from different cult, a common thread that I get is what you're talking about. And yet, when I shift my perspective, what is visible to me is very different. Let me share this example with you. Sometime back, I was talking to somebody from Britain, and we were talking about Bhagat Singh. Bhagat Singh is considered to be a martyr in India. And when I was talking to this gentleman from Britain, he said, "Oh, I didn't know that." I said, "Tell me more about that." He said, "I thought that Bhagat Singh was a terrorist." I said, "Tell me more about that." He said, "We have got books written about the history between India and Britain. And what I realized, Bhagat Singh was a terrorist." And shift to the history books written in India, Bhagat Singh is considered, he is a martyr for us.
Yeah.
Another example, every time when I used to go and deliver programs in Kashmir, people would say, "Hey, somebody has come from India." And from here, I'm going to Kashmir, and that's a land where there's a lot of division going on. There's a lot of fights going on, arguments going on between India and Pakistan. I'm just trying to elevate the conversation, and I'll come back to the value part, which is extremely important. I'm a believer that values and purpose is what differentiates, the context is what differentiates Osama bin Laden from Nelson Mandela. However, when I'm saying is, so we are foreigners on the land of Kashmir. From their perspective, from our perspective, I'm just dabbling between one place to another, just a matter of boundary, and that to state boundary. That's one part of it.
Yeah.
Is value the only difference or what? Because if value the only difference, I'm sure Osama bin Laden would have been very, very kind, very, very kind to his own people. I'm sure there must be high amount of integrity in those sects whom we label as terrorists. Then where is the division? Am I making sense in my question?
Yeah, you are. I think what it comes down to, part of where the values get reinforced come through the stories that we tell, right? Like you said, and a great example is, history textbooks in India, history textbooks in the United Kingdom, right? So, and of course, as we assimilate stories, the nature of stories is that we don't necessarily know. If I'm in school, I don't go, "Is this story true or not?" I sort of take it at face value and I internalize that story, and it becomes a part of my core beliefs, especially if we get them at a young age, right? And so it's so easy. This is why I think we get these cultural blind spots and these beliefs that get very intractable, because the stories are in us, and so it's very challenging to question stories, especially if questioning stories means that we now have to question the tribe that we are a part of, the community that we're part of. Because if I question this, does that mean that I'm starting to detach myself from my current tribe? And right, you think about that. They talk about in the ancient classic times of like Greek times, Roman times, like the worst thing that could happen to you was not death, it was exile, right? Because we depended on each other. We lived in small bands of 100 and 150 people. And if you were exiled from your community, it was like death. So the sense of, are we willing to question beliefs, values, stories that might have us start to distance ourselves from people? And so that's hard work. It's hard work to do that. And I know that I continue to look at some of those stories for myself. Yeah.
Yeah. Let me bring another perspective, and I would love to hear from you. There's this gentleman, his name is Hari Bhakti. Hari Bhakti is a very dear friend, a very senior lawyer based out of Mumbai. He's doing some great work in the space of sustainability. Would love to hear your views on how do we integrate values and sustainability together? Why? Because most of the organizations, they are sticking to values and they are producing products and services, which is not good for the environment in the long run. And yet in those organizations, we have got those values of respect, compassion, kindness.
Yeah.
However, but for a very small community of people that they are working with. And on the other hand, if you look at different papers, different researches are saying that in next 40 years, the whole humanity would be going through some really difficult time because of the climate condition. How do you fit in? On one hand, we are talking about kindness. People are kind in different organizations. They are high on integrity, high on honesty. And yet in the long run, we are not taking care of the long-term sustainability. Same value, which is working in a small community of people, the same value is working in an organization for a country, but it's not working for the longer term impact. It's not working for different countries. It's not working for the world.
Yeah.
Where's the balance? What is the difference between the best business leaders and Osama bin Laden, if there is any?
Yeah. Well, this is, I appreciate that. We've gone off into the deep end of the pool here. It's great questions. Wow. So here's my take on this. And one of my favorite quotes in relationships to this comes from the Nobel Prize winner, Daniel Kahneman, who wrote Thinking Fast and Slow. And he says that, we are blind to our own blindness, right? Is that we don't recognize how blind we are. And I think this is the nature of humanity and something that we have to overcome. Let's go back to the stories that we tell and the stories that we believe are true. The fact is, one of the stories that we have been telling, I'll say collectively, and I'll say in the kind of, because I live in the West, so we'll say like the Western organizational world, is that we can have these values and we can succeed at, let's say profit and loss and run a successful company and, have these values, like you said, of kindness, integrity, and fairness. And a part of the story that we have been blind to is that in order for us to have been successful as we have for, at this point, it's well over 100 years, what we have been doing systematically is we have been externalizing a number of costs, right? So there's a number of, so the fact is, when Monsanto develops their pesticides to increase crop yields, right? They just look at, okay, here's the yield. You yield, like, say, 10 corn, and now you can yield 100 corn, right? So it's 10 times more. So look at the benefits, and we can measure all the benefits, but we don't measure, okay, so what's the chemicals doing to the groundwater? How is that polluting this for the next, right? All these things. Same thing with the exhaust. I think it's a good example is, where is the exhaust pipe on a car? It's behind you, right? It's sort of like, it goes back there and I'm going forward. And so, like, I think our world of progress has been like, we're driving a car, but we're blind to the fact that on the back end of us, which is kind of, right, like the waste, right, is this exhaust. And we don't realize that the exhaust is actually part of our whole system. And so to me, and I think you have a few brave, courageous, both leaders within organizations and in some governments are going, we can no longer externalize these costs. We cannot do this. I mean, I love what's going on around some of the work around climate change, where people are realizing we can't do this. And what is that going to lead? And I think for most people, because the effects are not, it's like a lot of things in life. If you don't see the instant result right now, it must not exist, right? It's like, oh, well, and I recognize this too for myself. I look at my own carbon footprint and I think, like, what can I do? Like, what can I offset? I mean, if I was true to truly all of these values, maybe I would never get in a car again, right? And then I think, well, how would that work? How would that live? And I know some people that choose to do that, or some people who never get on a plane. They just by principle, and I applaud that. And what can we do? And it's such a big problem that I think what ends up happening is people easily, myself included, at times just get overwhelmed by the problem. It's like, and then, what are we willing to do? And what are going to be the big levers that can make a change? And I think those are difficult questions that have been being asked. I mean, look, when Jimmy Carter was president of the United States, they put solar panels on the roof of the White House. And that was 50 years ago. And then Reagan came in and took them down and said, it's morning in America. And, so we've had these issues have been in the mainstream dialogue for a long time, but they're big and they're complicated. And they're not politically expedient, right? Because the fact is, what it means is you have to do some in the short term, you have to invest for things. And people are like, why are we spending money on this? I'd rather, and so unfortunately, people focus on the short term. And for politicians who want to get elected again, doing it the other way around feels like political suicide, right? And so Big question. I think it goes back to the fact, yeah, we are blind to our own blindness. So hope that answers your question a bit. So
What a beautiful analogy that you have used, Alain. The analogy of exhaust pipe. And I think the words which are coming to me right now is coaching is definitely not linear.
yeah,
The cause and effect does not work when you're working with human beings. Gratification is suicidal. And there is no short-term solution to when we are looking for and when we are looking forward to handle and deal with challenges in the ecosystem. Is it a fair assumption to make?
yeah, I think absolutely it's a fair. I mean, yeah, I mean, there's so much complexity here. There's so much complexity, and human brain doesn't do well with complexity, right? We tend to want, like, I can only really focus on one thing. My optical nerves can only work on one thing at a time. And so when we get to complexity and all these different levels, it starts to literally overwhelm my sensory. Yes, and I tend to shut that down. So I think the assumption is it's very fair to make, for sure.
Let's take one step forward and let's bring, so since most of the leaders here, I don't think that we are dealing with anything which is beyond one organization, two organizations. There are leaders I can see who are on the boards of several organizations, but I don't think that there is anybody who is dealing with geopolitical scenarios, geopolitical challenges. So let's bring it down to 10,000 feet above ground. Today, I got somebody, he said, Gaurav, I'm looking forward to one of the biggest challenges that the organization is facing today is to hire, recruit, retain, help people grow in an organization. The challenge is we are not being able to retain. What is the quick fix? How can we do that? How can we handle that challenge? What's your take on that?
Well, first of all, notice the assumption that's baked into the question, right? What is the quick fix?
Yeah.
so
that was the exact question Mr. Singh asked me. And that's the reason I did not have an answer. Of course, I had an answer, but I don't think that landed well for him. But if you ask me, is that the best answer I know? I think that that's the best answer I know. And I'm grounded into conviction. I think that's the best possible way. But would love to hear from you. What's your take on that? How can we hire, retain people for the long-term growth of an organization?
Yeah, I think what it comes down to is if you're looking to hire and engage and then retain people in an organization, you have to think about what is the organization that they're going to be spending their time in, which leads me to culture. It's like, so what is the culture that you have created, and that how can you create a culture that is so attractive that it by nature attracts people who want to stay, who want to do good work, who don't want to leave. And, the tendency, I think, a lot of people think that we have to look at our employee engagement. We have to look at, and I think that is the wrong question, and it's the wrong direction. It's, the only way to engage employees is to engage leaders, and for leaders to realize it is up to us to create the culture in which people are going to thrive, in which people are going to be attracted, to retain, to be productive, to engage. And if you think about that, and I ask oftentimes when I'm working with leaders, I'll say, when you think about the word engagement outside of employee engagement and all that, when you think about the word engagement in life, where do we tend to use the word engaged? And of course, the answer everyone says is when you get married, right? Before you get married, you get engaged. And if I was to ask someone to be engaged with them, to be married, what am I really saying? What I'm really saying is, I want to spend the rest of my life with you, right? In the institution of marriage. So what we're saying is, I want to spend time, attention, and focus on you. And I think, unfortunately, there's so many organizational cultures where people are, you're in, here's your desk, here's your laptop, good luck, see you, goodbye. And then we're too busy. Because really what we all want to be seen, all of us as human beings at a core level, going back to human values, is we need to feel like we're part of something. We're mammals. By design, we're not meant to be, again, you want to exile people, you put people in solitary confinement. These are the worst punishments we can do. And so what are you doing when you engage people? That means I am going to spend time in you. I'm going to care about you. I'm going to see you. I'm going to value you. I'm going to respect you. And you think about, what do great coaches do? Like, part of the coaching, in the ICF, we talk about the coaching mindset and coaching presence. It's around, I am, if let's say we're in a coaching session right now and I was checking my phone and doing my email while I was coaching you, it's not a very good relationship I'm building. And so I think it's important for us to ask, what am I doing to create a culture where people feel seen, recognized, valued? And yeah, we want to get good work done too. But the challenge in so many organizations is we tend to be so scoreboard focused, right? The numbers focused. And one of the things I often coach people on and leaders around is that you actually realize the numbers, those performance numbers, whether that's sales, revenue, quality, whatever, you pick your numbers in whatever organization, those numbers are just a reflection of the behavior of people. Like sales don't sell themselves. There's a salesperson that sold something. And so we have to stop being so numbers focused and be a bit more people focused. Because if we prioritize it, we're not going to forget about the numbers. We know we have a business to run, but we need to prioritize the people first. Because if we prioritize the people will actually take care of the numbers. And I think part of the reason that people don't prioritize the people is because people are messy by nature. People don't show up the same way every day. The fact is, numbers are much more distinct. Every day I know the number 7 will always be more than 6 and always less than 8. And there's something that's safe about that. So for many leaders, they can sit in their offices, look at the spreadsheet, see the performances, how things are coming in, and be okay with that. And so I think, to go back to answering your question, I think it comes back to the willingness to recognize that working with people in an interpersonal environment, it's up to me as a leader to create a culture that people want to be in.
Alan, I hear you, I see you, I feel you. And yet I'm in a reflective space that for as long as I have read the management books, for as long as I have read leadership books or books on coaching, people have been talking the same thing, that how well you engage with people, how well you care for people, how well do you connect with people. And yet, if you look at where we are right now is where we were 20 years back, where we were in the industrial age. Then also we were talking about how to engage people. Today also we are talking about how to engage people. The mental wellness score continues to deteriorate with all the literature, all the researchers that have gone that is saying otherwise. What do you think? What is coming in the way of people to implement this simple concept of engaging, connecting with people at the deepest possible level, where people can engage with each other, where people can express themselves from their true strengths, where people are able to connect with each other and they would be able to contribute for the larger good?
It is still happening. And I think what is getting in the way is our, how do I say this best? I think what's getting in the way is, frankly, our central nervous systems. Let me explain what I mean by that. I think what is getting in the way is we, without a lot of what I would consider very challenging, difficult work to change patterns, to change neurological patterns of how people behave, we are very much predestined to repeat the patterns of behavior that the previous generation did. Because again, we talk about, the United States is a democracy, and and you think about most organizations are not democracies, right? Most companies are not democracies. Most families are not democracies. So the question I have for everyone here, and I'll be honest with you, and I'll ask you to be honest with yourself too, is in your family of origin, did you have someone who was bigger and older than you basically use power to say, you need to do this because I said so? And some variation in that, and the level of intensity could have been anywhere from this big to screaming, shouting, beating you, right? And just think about that. And just think about how your nervous system responded to power struggle, right? So if you've had that experience, which I talked to a lot of people, I'd say the overwhelming majority of us have had that experience of power struggle, and what it feels like to be powerless in that situation is hardwired into us because it happened from the time we're babies. And again, things that happen before we become, age of 7 and 8, that just becomes a part of who we are. And so we can talk about, and again, I hear what you're saying, that hasn't changed. I want to challenge that. I know it hasn't changed but look at some of the conversations that we're having now that we weren't having even 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Things around mental health in the workplace. We weren't having these conversations. Conversations around diversity, equity, inclusion. We weren't having these conversations 10 years ago. Conversations around emotional intelligence. We weren't having those conversations 15 years ago. And so that piece is moving slowly. However, you think about the power struggle. And so what ends up happening is if we've had that, do this because I said so, because I'm your dad, that's why, and so guess what? When I get to be in a role where I have some power, I go ahead and repeat exactly what was done to me, unless I stop and go, that kind of behavior stops with me. And I mean, from my own experience, it takes a lot of work because there is a momentum that is like, we're going downhill. It's so much easier just to stick on the neural pathways of that course. To stop that is so challenging, I think, this at a human level. And I think it takes an amazing amount of courage and patience and humility, because what it means is you can no longer go and resort to the same bag of tricks that other people used. You have to, it's much more compelling. And I share this all because, on a very personal level, my wife, she remembers growing up in a family where, and she describes it, until the age of 5, like she could do no wrong. She was the apple of her father's eye. Right. And it was like this wonderful thing. And somehow at around 5 or so, these expectations kind of kicked in where her father's like, you need to do this. And then the power struggle came in, and she viscerally remembers, she said, if I ever become a parent, I will never parent in that way. That is just wrong. And I don't know about you, but for me, I've blocked all of that. Like, for whatever the trauma was too bad, I have blocked those kind of memories out. But she has them. She remembered them. And so when we came time to having children, our children are now 18 and 15. She was very clear on that. And I've watched her, and she has been my role model. I'd love to say that I'm great at it. Everything I've learned from her around this. And she is much better at it. And what I have seen is it takes an exquisite amount of patience and perseverance and a willingness to sacrifice one's own needs to take care of, in this case, a developmentally challenged person, because a 2-year-old is developing, a 3-year-old is developing. And so how many of us have that willingness to be that much of service, to be that much of patience, to have things take that much longer than they would? Because let's face it, to say, do this in the short term, you get compliance. But what you don't get is commitment. And I think that's true with families. Beautiful. I think it's true with employees. And so I think where it comes down to is this neurological wiring of where we are, and that it's very hard to unwind power and power struggle.
Such a beautiful reflection. Alain, thank you for bringing that.
Sure.
In my mind, I'm just repeating that how recent in the last 15, 20 years, we have started to talk about equality, DEI, we have started to talk about emotional intelligence. And yes, you know what? It has been in the system for several decades, centuries, but not in the way that people are able to relate to it right now. I'm sure equality has been a concept in Islam as much as it has been in Christianity, in Hinduism, or Sikhism. In fact, Guru Nanak Dev Ji, 500 years back, spoke about equality and how it's so important to let go of different caste, different religion, where he challenged the different rituals that Hindus and Muslims used to believe 500 years back. And he said that how it's so important to give respect to women. 500 years back, I'm talking about. And yet, I think the way people understand that today, it's very, very different. So that's one I'm listening, right? The other thing that you mentioned about the destined part, I think I am so much in love with you with that, because we believe we have choices. But the question that I ask myself is, did I have the choice to born in the context where I'm born into? Right? The Afro-Americans, I don't think that they behave exactly the way white Americans behave. Their relationship with dogs is very different from the relationship that whites would have with dogs. Where is it coming from? The epigenetic that we have been speaking about.
Yeah.
The pain that's coming from one generation to another that we have been talking about, do we have a way to navigate our path from that? I really don't know. Now, the only word which is coming to me right now is the awareness part. And I think that's where I'm going to bring in the concept of bringing coaching and leadership together. What's your take on that? How can a coach assist a leader to get over this trauma that has been given to him, that has been passed to him from generations to generations? Those reactive patterns which are not serving him, those self-destructive patterns which are not serving him. What do you think? What is the role of a coach in allowing this leader to become a leader who is very inclusive, who is emotionally mature, who's willing to let go of patterns which are not assisting him or her, and create a space where we all can blossom, where we all can have respect, where DEI could really uh, mushroom. So
Mhm. Great question. So what can a coach do to help a leader to help him or her to start to unwind some of those patterns? So one of the things I think that is so powerful about, and this is obviously assuming that the coach is good, right? So, because there's not necessarily everyone can do this work at that level, is one of the things that coaching offers is when a leader enters into the coaching space and they want to be there, they've already set in motion a willingness to grow and an intention that I'm going to bring something. I often say to my coach is like, well, there's this thing that's going on and I really don't want to tell you this, so I need to tell you this, right? So I've already had the shorthand of, so it takes courage to do this work. And I think entering into a coaching relationship, and so one of the things that a coach does is a coach provides safety, right? So a safety, because trying to do this work on my own is it's almost impossible sometimes. I need support. And so I think what the coach provides is support. And the other thing is what a good coach does is, first of all, as I start to want to try to unwind this, the coach is a witness. And I think there is something that is so powerful about the idea of being seen in my truth, for you to be seen in your truth, and just to kind of get that out, literally out of our bodies into the world, like that, I think begins the healing process already. Okay. So we do that. And then the other thing is that because the coach is not emotionally invested the same way that the leader is, the coach can hopefully see things and reflect and offer observations through questioning to go and help gently but firmly, challenge a belief, a question, and then redirect someone to start to recognize that a lot of things that you are taking as reality are not necessarily objective reality. They're just a way that you have adopted and grown into a belief system, which may or may not be serving you. And it is one thing to recognize that at the intellectual level. But I mean, for me, and this is why I've been kind of in personal development work for 29 years now, is that it's like they're layers, like more layers keep coming down and down. And that, my ability to function in the world keeps growing, but also I get down to some of these core things, like at a more core and deep level. So I think what the coach offers the leader is safety, witnessing, and an ability to help them to redirect and recraft a story to help them in the future.
thank you so much, Alain. I think what a beautiful conversation it had. And as I'm just reflecting, I'm just asking myself, when you spoke about being a witness, being a reflective space, I'm just wondering, what are those biases that I have that might be coming in my way every time when I'm coaching? Is it the bias of color? Is it the bias of language? Is it the bias of status quo? Is it the bias of creed? Is it the bias of religion? Is it the bias of affluence? Is it the bias of language? Is it the bias of experience? What are those biases that I'm holding on to that's not allowing me to penetrate, to explore the truth, the reality of the other person? Because if I'm not empty, I don't think that I'll be able to explore that and allow the other person to look into his or her reality. So thank you so much, Alan. And Alan, always such a pleasure listening to you.
It's
I
my pleasure to
love
speak with
your
you.
analogies. I love your experience. And I love the gravitas that you bring in your voice.
It's an honor. It's a pleasure, my friend. I look forward to when
Sure.
we get to meet in person one day.
Looking
Yeah.
forward.
And yeah, thank you all for being so engaged through this. I mean, I know numerous things came in through the chat. I'm going to thank you all for being so engaged. And I hope that you're able to take some ideas and to be willing to hold up that mirror to yourself. So thank you.
Alan, thank you so much, my friend. So
It's
looking forward to have you here.
my pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you so much. And thank you all.
Thank you, Alan. Always a pleasure listening to you
Yes,
and
thanks.
genuinely appreciate this connection. Thank you so much.
You too.
Take care.
Take care. Thanks.